films use the hero's journey model. Okay? Almost all stories do. Okay? So all this information that we're talking about today is shortened, but it's all from this book. This is the book that I used in college to talk about myth. Okay? So this is all from Joseph Campbell. So basically, with the hero's journey, there is a person, and they are called the initiate, because you don't make hero till you make it all the way around the circle. But if you see this circle on the front of the sheet here, they start as the initiate. They get into the story by something calls them. That's the call to adventure. Okay? And then they have to cross some threshold. There's something that takes them from kind of one world to another. They experience in that other world challenges, temptations, situations, and then they get to that very lowest point that they can possibly get. So you kind of have to think about this model almost in opposition to that idea of conflict and rising action and climax as far as graphics go. If you think about it, the climax sort of equals what we call the very bottom of this, which is the abyss, right? So the very lowest point. When the main character, or the initiate, hits that very, very low point, that is the abyss. That's the bottom. And they got to start coming up from there, okay? And usually there is some return, so they kind of understand what they learned, they come back and they return, usually with something to the original either place or the original kind of person they were before, okay? Now, one thing I want to do is I want to talk about how this plays itself out with some very popular, and this is what you're going to use next class. I'm probably going to end up taking these back up. Actually, let me see. Is this? No. Okay, so let's look at it this way. Because you're going to use this when you're going to map out the Odyssey as the hero's journey while you're watching the movie. Okay? But I'm going to talk while you guys are doing this. Take one. So here is what I just described in very short suit, and then in more clear and precise is right here. Okay? So this is goes into much more detail than I did. And it is online. I'm probably going to get you guys to give me these unless somebody just wants to keep the hard copy. Okay? So, for instance, let's talk about this with Katie, right, from Mean Girls. Okay? I would use Holden, but Holden kind of doesn't transform. Holden doesn't make it to hero status. So he doesn't kind of quite get there, right? We figure out that at the end, too, with Holden, right? They ask me what I'm going to do in September when I go back to school, if I'm going to change and be better, and he says, how do I know if I'm going to do that until I do it, right? So he's still the same old Holden. But Katie has a change, right? As most main characters do. So here's Katie the initiate. What's her call to adventure?
High school.
High school. She has to go to high school. She's been homeschooled. She's been in Africa, right? So now she's going to her first public high school, and she's 16 years old, right? That's her call to adventure, and what an adventure it is. And then some of these other little things like supernatural aid, well, Katie doesn't have that. But threshold guardians, who's the guardian of the threshold for Katie? Who kind of... the first friend she makes? Janice and Damien. Damien, right? Janice and Damien, those are her threshold guardians, right? They're sort of helping her into this new world, as sort of unhelpful as they can be sometimes, right? They take her out and tell her about the room outside. It's not there, really there, and make her skip class. But they're the threshold guardians. And then all the challenges and temptations that she experiences, right? Like having to crush on Aaron and Regina stealing him back and having to wear pink and having to pretend to do all this plastic work, right? So there's all kinds of things. You remember that happened in that movie, right? And those are all challenges and temptations. What's this point for her? What's the abyss? What's the low point for Katie? The absolute lowest point. Yeah?
When everyone sees the book and it's like fighting over it.
Okay.
Everybody hates
Right. I don't know. I kind of think of it as that moment when, was this post-book, when she has the party and Janice and Damien discover that they weren't invited?
Yeah.
You're not pretending anymore. You are plastic, cold, shiny.
That's the very one.
That wasn't at the very end. I don't think so. I think that was before the burn book, right?
Yeah, it was.
So maybe that's the last. Maybe I'm thinking wrong, and that's the last challenge or temptation, and the abyss, which is equal to the climax, is the burn book, right? When she's sitting there and she doesn't want to confess to anything. But then what is the transformation? What causes her to change?
When she loses her friends.
Yeah, when she loses them, and finally she, this has got to stop, right? And she goes and she joins the mathletes, and then at the
Isn't she forced to?
well, and she apologizes for doing that. Her transformation is that apology to the teacher, right? And the teacher's what makes her do the mathletes, right? But she's doing it. And then the transformation where she breaks the crown and and that's making amends. So that's that atonement where she's like, I'm sorry for all the people I hurt. Here's you, look great. Here's you piece of crown for you and you and you and you, right? So she apologizes to everyone, and that's the atonement. And then the return is her back to sort of being herself, right? Not plastic, hanging out with Janice and Damien, and right? So you see how Katie follows that whole hero's journey, basically, right? I mean, you can think of almost every movie, every book, almost all follow this. And you can check it out with novels that you've read and characters that you've enjoyed. Like I said, Holden makes it down here, and he doesn't quite make it back up. So he doesn't make a hero. No one in literature would call Holden a hero. Because he doesn't make the journey. He doesn't make the last part of the journey. And that's what makes him unique in literature as well, as a character, especially a main character. Okay? So what you're going to be doing with this while watching the Odyssey is you are going to be looking at Odysseus right here. And actually, why don't you go ahead and turn it over on the back and right at the top where it's blank, Odysseus. Yep. Here's how you spell his name. Odysseus. Oh my God. Right, next class, you gotta have those, because I'm not gonna be here, and Sub is gonna be letting you watch the movie, and you're gonna be tracking Odysseus' journey, right?
This is the ending right,
Yeah.
right here.
Right, right. And in between, you're gonna read that hero's journey information, okay? Do you guys need these, or can you read it on your iPads? If you can read it on your iPad, leave these with me, okay? And what I'll try to do is I'll try to make that document, instead of a doc, I'll try to make it a PDF, so you can actually put it in Notability and write on it, okay? And what I would say to that is just look over, read over that hero's journey information, do some highlighting and stuff in Notability, okay? All right, so now what I want you to do in Notability is I want you to write down some of these things and leave some space in between, okay? Like you're gonna, so go ahead to Notability and write down these terms, but leave some space in between, because I'm going to talk about all these things right now. Just a new blank page. Do you make sure, you guys that are using this particular cart right now, these iPads, that whatever you do in Notability today, you move it into Drive right away? Because this is going away tomorrow. I thought they were going to take it yesterday. Huh? These things. Yeah, just leave some room in between.
right about 137.
Holy moly. This is gonna be tough. Get everything done today, set you up. Alright, so can I talk while you guys are writing this down?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So, just a few things that you really need to know about the Odyssey before we bust into it, okay? One is that Homer is considered the author of both the Iliad and the Odyssey, okay? He was the first one to write them down. But the Odyssey and the Iliad's the book that comes before this, really both epic poems, they were oral. So they were poems, epic poems. Ryan, wake up, take notes, come on. They were epic poems that people went around from town to town and told to other people. Those people that told the poems were called the rhapsodes. So what these guys did is these were stories that had been around forever, and the Odyssey is a gigantically long epic poem, and so is the Iliad. And they would go from town to town, and they'd be like, hey, you know what, we got a story for you. If you give us some food and pay for, or put us up somewhere, we'll tell you the story. So they would tell them a little bit of the story, and they'll be like, oh, well, more tomorrow. And then the next day, you know, so they would stay in a town for as long as they could and stretch out this epic story, right? Told in a poem, so it was easy to remember and tell. And then they would move on to the next town, and the next town, and the next town, okay? So that's what who the rhapsodes were. They were the teller of the story. And then eventually Homer wrote them down, okay? Now, both the Iliad and the Odyssey are epic poems. The Iliad is the story of the Battle of Troy. So, huh? Yeah, you're supposed to be taking notes. So, how many of you have seen that movie, Troy? Anybody? So that's the story of the Iliad. At the beginning of the Odyssey that I'm going to show you next class, the first part of that is a very compressed version of the Iliad, okay? And the real story of the Odyssey doesn't start until they leave Troy. So the story of the Odyssey is Odysseus' journey. He was the guy that thought up the Trojan horse in Troy, in the Iliad. Okay, that was Odysseus. Okay, and then when they're leaving Troy, he and his men on the ship sailing back to Ithaca. And Ithaca is the island state that Odysseus is the king of. This is the story, the Odyssey, of that journey back from Troy to Ithaca. Now, it took them 10 years. So the battle in Troy was 10 years, the Iliad, and then the Odyssey was his journey back was also 10 years. Yeah, question?
Who's journey back?
Odysseus and his men. Mm-hmm.
So the Odyssey is the story of Odysseus
Coming back from Troy. Exactly. And then the only other word, well, I got a couple things up here. So in the real telling of the Odyssey, it is told in a form called in media res. Okay? And that just means at the beginning of the story is really the middle of the story. Okay? So the story begins, it won't do this in the moon. They've straightened it out for you. But in the real story, it starts with Odysseus washing up on the island of Phaeacia, where King Alcinous hears his story and helps him get back to Ithaca. But that is the middle, or later, of the story. Because what happens in Phaeacia is that he goes back to tell about all the things that have happened to him up to the point where he lands in Phaeacia. So the story, in media res, is when the story starts in the middle, and it goes back but then it goes forward from the middle to the end. It's a lot of new information. I know, I get it, right? In media res, you can look it up anywhere. As long as you've got it down, right?
What is it?
So it means basically that the story starts in the middle, and it goes back, and then it comes back to the middle to go forward. So it goes like, this is when he washes up on Phaeacia. This is back leaving Troy. And this is where the story starts, because this information about leaving Troy and all the things that happened, he tells to the king of Phaeacia as part of his story. And then the Phaeacian king says, let's get you back to Ithaca. And then he gets home. So in media res just means starts in the middle. It goes backwards and then forwards to the end. But it's not simple flashback. Because this is like the middle of the story going back and then coming back to the middle and going forward. Okay? Brian, are you writing this down? You need to be putting this down. So, that's in media res. Yes? So the Iliad is the story of the Trojan War. Okay? So this is Troy. And then this is leaving Troy to Ithaca. Both are 10 years. Okay? And then the last word up here that you don't have is hubris. And hubris is extreme arrogance and overconfidence. Extreme arrogance and overconfidence.
What's the word? What's the word?
Hubris.
Hubris?
Hubris. It's up there. Hubris. So I also think it would be helpful for you to write down these characters that are in the Odyssey. So you can do that on the same notability document that you did this on. Everybody got that? I know this is a lot of information. Sorry. It will be much more clear once you kind of start watching the movie and can. Do read your hero's journey information. That is your homework. Okay? Read over it. All right. I want to show you one thing really quickly. And then, so you can just stop that. 'Cause
Okay.
she's already seen